All right, and we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back for another round of the one, the only semi-informative IT podcast. I have no doubt that you're just as excited as I am to embark on this intellectual quest to learn about information security. Now, before kicking into gear, I initially thought this topic would be fairly mundane, but then I thought, is James Bond mundane? No. Or did the United States think Hillary Clinton using a private email for potentially sensitive information was boring? No. And would anyone say history-shifting technological warfare is dull? They might, but I beg to differ. So the thing is, information security plays and has played a tremendous role in how we live our lives today, and I hope this presentation sheds some light on that. All right. So to start off with a little joke, here's a graphic that says, I'm sure there are better ways to disguise sensitive information, but we don't have a big budget. Clearly, the computer is not disguised very well. I mean, his nose is probably much smaller than that in real life. Okay, so now that we're actually starting the presentation, let me tell you what we're going to cover. First, I thought we ought to have the same foundational understanding of what information security is. Then we'll dive into the rich history of the broad topic. And following this, we'll chat about some of the common threats with modern day information security. And then I'll toss some real world examples of this at you. So what exactly is information security? It is defined as the state of being protected against the unauthorized use of information, especially electronic data, or the measures taken to achieve this. This can be related to either physical or electronic information. It's really asking the question, what can we do to keep our precious information safe? For this topic, it's difficult to narrow down the history, but I'll do my best to flesh out some of the most noteworthy events. With information security, most people tend to think of firewalls, passwords, or systems updates, but the roots of this topic actually go much deeper than that. Information security has really been a thing since people started communication, and in Carl DeLue's The History of Information Security, a comprehensive handbook, DeLue states, the origin of information security can be traced back to the rise of hierarchical command and control structures and administration and warfare from civilizations of the ancient world. So let's see what he means by that. As early as 500 BCE, we see the Greek state Sabaeis make it possible to obtain a one-year patent for any new refinement in luxury. So friends, this is actually the first sign of intellectual property being protected. Now, jump ahead a handful of centuries, and we see this good old thing called the Statute of Monopolies, created in 1623. This was British legislation that made it so major industries were controlled by guilds or old-timey unions, and it was essentially England's first patent law. Jump ahead to 1770, 1780, and we see that when the United States breaks away from Great Britain, 12 of the 13 colonies had existing systems for intellectual property. Then, moving on to the 1800s, in 1883 and 1886, we see two milestone events in the world of information security. The first being the Paris Convention, which made it so international patents were available to protect innovators when their creations were used in other countries. Then right after this, we had the Berne Convention, which did the same thing as the Paris Convention, but for the arts like writing, opera, music, statues, paintings, etc. A handful of years down the road, the two offices formed by the Paris and Berne Conventions combined to form the United International Bureau for the Protection of Intellectual Property. What a name. This organization eventually turned into the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is an office of the United Nations. And of course, moving to more contemporary history, during World War II, we see the use of things like Morse code, or the Enigma, a message encrypting device used by Germans, eventually cracked by Alan Turing in 1940. Now, moving forward into the late 20th century and the early 21st century, we see massive advancements with telecommunications, computing hardware and software, and data encryption. Small businesses could use computing equipment, or use the growing industry of e-commerce. And any individual could have a powerful smartphone sitting in their pocket where they can access their email, bank accounts, and other sensitive data. Of course, this has led to concerns on how all this tech can be protected. So let's jump into some of the common threats in modern day information security. Generally speaking, there are 6 categories that define the modern day threats of information. First, we have software attacks. This is likely the most well-known issue and is summarized by viruses, worms, phishing attacks, and Trojan horses. Next, in the middle of this slide, we have the theft of intellectual property, which is generally an issue for businesses. And this explains all those intellectual property laws we worried about back in 500 BC even. Then next up, we have identity theft, which is when someone pretends to be someone else in order to access and use the personal information of the victim. Then fourth, moving from left to right, we have theft of equipment or information. That's pretty self-explanatory. Fifth, sabotage is a big player in this roster of threats. For example, if someone hacks a company's website and posts some unflattering content, consumers may lose faith in the company and be less likely to do business with them, even though such an event might have been out of their control. And then finally, we have information extortion, which is stealing property or information in order to sell it to someone else or benefit in some way by giving it away. So what can we do about all this nonsense? Clearly, there are a number of things to be concerned about, but there are 3 general responses we can use to address those malicious threats. First, we can face the issue head on and introduce safeguards and countermeasures to eliminate the block of potential threats. Second, we can delegate another entity to deal with this stuff by purchasing insurance or something comparable. And then third, you can always do nothing, like our friend Homer here. If your computer is fried from a whole bunch of viruses hanging around, it might be easier to cut your losses and get a new piece of hardware. But you know, knock on wood. All right, so let's go ahead and check out some real life examples that demonstrate the importance of information security and its relevance to today even. To start off, we have Edward Snowden, possibly one of the most known folks in the world for releasing touchy information. Long story short, Eddie, former CIA employee, copied and leaked classified info from the NSA back in 2013. His story is fairly controversial given that he's considered a traitor by some and a patriot by others, or as you can see here, hero traitor. And the information he leaked actually had to do with mass government surveillance over the common population of the United States. And this has actually stimulated quite a debate on the balance of national security and information privacy. Then moving on to former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, Hill Dog. We've all probably heard about her in the news. So what our former candidate did was use her personal email address connected to a privately owned server while working as the Secretary of State. Now, why'd she do that? She claimed it was actually simply a matter of convenience. And she later admitted that using a personal email may not have been the best choice, but she had not leaked any classified information. However, the mandate for government officials to move from private to government servers wasn't kicked in until 2014, which was after Hillary left the State Department. So of course, a number of questions can be raised from this controversy or scandal, depending on how you look at it, but it continues to shed light on the importance of information security. And then a recent one that you might have seen in the news is with Yahoo, the email provider. And now that we're looking at the private sector, let's take a glance at what actually happened to Yahoo. Back in 2013, hackers successfully slipped into Yahoo's systems and accessed the private information of over 3 billion users. That's, yes, with a B, billion users. Now, massive amounts of data are accessible, like birth dates and telephone numbers, passwords, and much more that could do harm to those users. A key criticism of this event is that no one actually knew all this happened until 2016, 3 years after the fact. So Yahoo withheld the fact that this happened for a handful of years, meaning that the users were actually vulnerable and unable to do anything at all about this infringement. So things like this let us know that the fight for information security or information security measures is definitely an uphill battle, and also brings into question the ethical responsibilities of private enterprises. Of course, with information security, you could go much deeper into a gigantic range of topics, but that is all I have for you today.